It's Canada Day today, which is a complicated celebration at any time, especially this year. I thought we could honor that in our practice today. The Indian residential schools were something that were paid for by the government and run by the Catholic Church, primarily the Catholic Church. Their stated purpose was to take the Indian out of the child. That alone is horrible. It's abusive. There was a lot of physical, emotional, sexual abuse. It was covered up. The last few months in Canada, there have been some, it's not really discoveries because Indigenous people have always known what had happened. These children were forced to go to schools. Parents could be arrested if they didn't send their children to schools. The people came into small communities and flew all the children out. It's a very tragic period in Canada's history and part of the genocide of Indigenous people from settler Canadians. So this is a heavy time and heavy experience. And a lot of white people might have been a little bit aware of Indian residential schools, but there's a lot of media about it. And we're really seeing some of the impact. There's thousands of children's bodies in either mass graves or unmarked graves. Children just disappeared. And those were the ones who didn't make it back to their communities. It's really the root and the foundation of a lot of the addiction, intergenerational trauma that's still happening today. So as a white settler Canadian, like many others, I'm really grappling with what I can do now. It's natural for people to defend themselves against this. It feels really awful that we were part of this, even though it was our ancestors. I didn't individually make that choice. And there has to be a way to keep an open heart and to not go into a shame storm when our people, so to speak, if you are white, and especially if you are a white settler in North America, then you are part of the genocide of Indigenous peoples on these lands. That's kind of the background of what I've been sitting with and what a lot of people have been sitting with. Some people are kind of surprised. They haven't really known much about it. There's a lot of de facto segregation in Canada between Indigenous people and white settlers. There's a lot of community breakdown, and there's a lot of Indigenous communities that are not the stereotypical Indian or Indigenous person that we might think of. Canada has a very long and difficult relationship. When we look at other countries, we see the same or similar dynamics. What do we do now? One of the things that we could do is to try to stay regulated in our nervous system and let it in. This is the truth. We don't have to defend ourselves against it. We could let it in. What does it feel like right now in your body? Notice your breath. Let yourself breathe. Notice any defense mechanisms that are coming in, any thoughts, any turning away, anything like that. There could be a hard-heartedness that comes in. That happened centuries ago. They should be over it by now. One of the defenses sometimes people will think. And in Canada, the last Indian residential school closed in 1997, not even 25 years ago. So this isn't ancient history. Feel whatever's here as much as you can and stay grounded. If you're feeling very triggered and like you want to get away from this, that's fine. You could open your eyes, you could go do something else. But if you wanted to, you could also notice what are the thoughts in your mind right now. Let's work with thoughts for a moment. One of the things that we can do, especially if we're in a shame storm, is to regulate our nervous system before we go farther. Look around the room. I can see 5 things and name them out loud. I can see kettle on the stove, trees out the window. Name 5 things you can see. Take some deep breaths in between. 4 things I can touch. I can feel the coolness of my desk. And name them out loud if you can. 3 things I can hear, whether that's inside your room or outside. 2 favorite smells or 2 things I could smell now. Let yourself savor the smell for a moment. And one favorite taste. Put your hands on your upper arms and just gently tap side to side. We feel the warmth of our own hands and arms. And then tapping bilaterally like this also gives us a chance to settle our nervous system. Take some deeper breaths. And then if the thoughts in your mind are still kind of persistent, you could always at any time do some tapping. Just a couple of fingers on your forehead, noticing the sound and sensation of the tapping. That helps us to break a trance of thoughts. You could put your hand on your heart, hold your own hands, take a few deep breaths and let this settle. And notice where you're at. Notice what you feel like now. One of the reasons that we are susceptible to our fight, flight, freeze, and escape strategies is because it's really uncomfortable to stay present with a lot of things. So on Canada Day, we traditionally celebrate with fireworks, parades, singing O Canada. White settlers tend to not think too much about Indigenous communities or Indigenous people. Of course, obviously, there are many people who are very connected, either in families or friends or communities. But for the most part, it's not something that we think about on Canada Day or that we reflect about. Part of what that is that people who aren't directly involved, people who aren't Indigenous, who don't have personal connections or who haven't really tuned in or attuned to it, have the privilege of not thinking about it. Our experience is not the same as everybody else's. And we all experience this in so many different ways, so we could probably relate to it on some level. I'm not at all comparing that as the same, but just to look and see for a moment, is there anything in your experience that you could use as kind of a bridge to understanding what it might feel like to be Indigenous today on a day when we're celebrating Canada? And every Indigenous person in Canada has a close relative who is at a residential school. It might have been themselves, an aunt or uncle, parents, grandparents, great grandparents. This is really personal. And everyone has seen the effect of that in their communities as well, in their own lives, family, friends, communities. And maintain your awareness of your breath, of your body. Stay present. And notice if there's any shaming coming in. Shaming being there's something really wrong with me, and if you're white, with my people. On a fundamental level, there's something really broken or wrong. It's very different from we have done some very wrong things, and now we are looking at that. I'm looking at my own life, my history, my ancestors, and I'm letting in the truth. And the truth is not simple, it's complicated. I'm sure everybody here has had experiences of being oppressed, being objectified, being hurt. And many of us here, especially if we're white, have been part of a culture and a community who has oppressed Indigenous people. And notice what that feels like just to hear those words. Maybe to be defending against them or to be dissociating, disconnecting. All of these are very natural nervous system responses. There's nothing wrong that we respond that way. And for the purpose of this, we're just sitting with that, letting it in. One of the things that happens is that we feel helpless. We feel like it's such a huge structural shift that has to happen to really make a difference. We might feel really personally responsible for the pain and suffering and feel an urgency to do something. And in Canada, there are things that we can do. We're a democracy, we can pressure our politicians. If we have the financial ability, we could make donations, we could learn. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has many recommendations. There are many ways that we can get engaged. And that would also help to work with that feeling of helplessness. We don't have to shut our hearts down. We don't have to defend ourselves against this. As adults, we could let it in, even as we support ourselves. So wherever you are in connection with this and with other circumstances of oppression, we could let it in. Let ourselves feel it. Notice your breath. Let your shoulders relax. Take a few deeper breaths and move your shoulders around a little bit. Move your body around a bit if you want. Shake a bit. Let some of this release. And in a country like Canada, there are so many wonderful things about this country. And sometimes when we look at what is disturbing or what we need to take responsibility for, it feels like we're wiping out all of the wonderful things about Canada. People come here as refugees from other countries because it's a wonderful place to live in many, many ways. And that's not the whole truth. It's not a movie. It's not a simple, everybody's the same. It's not that way. So how could we let in the good and our pride in our country, if that's what we have, or our distress, our sadness and grief, our determination to understand and educate ourselves and to make this better, to do something, take action. And to do this in a way that's possible. Can we keep an open heart? Can we support ourselves in this and not go into a shame storm? That doesn't help anybody. Can we take responsibility even as we're letting go of the shame? Notice the lingering effects of the inquiry in our body, our breath, emotions, thoughts. And let your body release as you breathe out. Let the tension leave your body. I'm strong enough to deal with the truth. I don't need to shame myself. I know that's not helpful. I also don't need to disappear. I can be careful and realistic about my nervous system, about my ability at any given moment to stay present, to be kind and open-hearted. This is a hard thing, and I can do hard things. I can let this in. And offer yourself all the love and compassion and kindness that you can. Let yourself feel. Notice your body, your breath, your mind, your feelings. And if you wanted to set an intention around this for going forward, it might just be to drop back into this. You might have some actions that you're already taking or that you could take. One of them would be action in the world, whatever you decide that you could do. And another certainly would be to work kindly and gently with yourself. We really are shut down and have no ability to help when we're in a shame storm. So to really work with that would be so helpful. I wasn't the architect of residential schools for Indian people at the time, and I am part of a culture and a society who still is engaged with this and who benefits with it if you're white, particular. And I have a responsibility to myself and to others. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. Certainly one thing that we can do is learn about the Indigenous people in the area where we live or where we're visiting. Right now here we're on unceded Mi'kmaq territory in Nova Scotia. And unceded has a lot of different meanings and different legal status. Where I came from in Saskatchewan and Alberta, there were treaties, Treaty 6 and Treaty 7, primarily people who had been in contact with white people much later. So here it was, the 1600s. In Alberta and Saskatchewan, it was more the late 1800s. So it's complicated, and it does really help to know the history. We weren't the first people here.